Good morning. Today is the 10th day of Adar, the 10th of March. Wow, that was a mouthful. And we are at the top of Ayin Zayin. Okay. Where do you think we are?
A quick resume. What happened over the last week?
So we're still talking about what Igulim and Yosher are, what are circles and lines, and now he's going to get more into the concept, which repeats many, many times here in this book and in other books, that even though Igulim and Yosher are in a certain sense, the meta thought, the Igulim and Yosher, the circles and lines, even though they are the meta model that the Kabbalah of the Arizal uses, because we said that the Zohar is full of references to understanding the Sfirot as one above the other, and there's many references that the Sfirot are along three axes. So when they're one above the other, he explained to us, that's what we saw on Friday, we didn't see this yesterday between us, that when they're one above the other, that's really should be depicted as concentric spheres. And he describes them like onion rings.
Describe something which is three-dimensional.
Right.
So
spheres.
Yes,
spheres.
I'm saying, it doesn't...
It's the same thing. If you take three-dimensional concentric spheres and project them on a two-dimensional surface, you would see circles that are concentric. It's the same idea.
But in reality,
so I usually say to people, each one of these spheres, since it itself is very complex, is like a 10-dimensional sphere. So we have no depiction of that. We don't really know what that looks like.
Imagine what 10-dimensional.
We can't even imagine what a 4-dimensional sphere is. So, but we can describe it mathematically. We can describe it in words. Even though we can't picture it, we don't understand. But what we're saying is that in every point of reality, there's 10 dimensions at least. It might be more, but this is the complexity of what this thing is. But the way to really think about it is concentric spheres. Okay, and then I tried to show you a picture last week in the Eitz Chaim. Yeah, you were here, I think, and I couldn't find it because in the version of the Eitz Chaim that I had last week, the picture wasn't there. But the picture is very simple. It's just concentric circles, and then there's a line that comes through them. So the concentric circles, that is what we call one above the other, strangely enough. That's what every time the Zohar talks about the Sfirot being one above the other, it's talking about that picture. That's how the Arizal explains it. But there's a different picture altogether where it's called the Yosher, which is called lines, and the lines is that they're along three axes.
I thought the word Yosher meant straight.
Right, it does. So let's see now. Kihine, so we're like seven lines down at the very end of the line. כי נזכר בעץ חיים שמקור העיגולים הוא העיגול הגדול שלפני הקו המקיף את הכל, מקור היושר הוא מהקו שנמשך מאור אינסוף אל תוך החלל. So now he says something very interesting. He says the concentric spheres, their source is one great circle that came before them. And what is this one great circle? It's, you can't understand this physically, you have to understand this figuratively. Literally, it's figuratively, right? It's a figure. This is the border between the infinite and the finite. So when Hashem first... It's a mashal. It's a geometric mashal. And this was very common in the Middle Ages to do it this way. Now the Ari is at the very end of the Middle Ages, but he's still there. He's 1530, right? 1570. So he's very close to still to the Middle Ages and that way of thinking. Lehavdil, there were many other philosophers who also used geometric models to explain their thought. It was just a common way of doing it. It's been done that way since Plato. So it's just a way of doing it. And you shouldn't understand this in any way literally. There's nothing literal to it. So the concentric spheres, their source is the great sphere, the great circle that precedes them. What is that great circle? that is the border between the infinite and the finite. So when Hashem created the world, He had to create a border between the infinite, as it were, and the finite. And the worlds were created within the finite circle. And there's a great circle that's bounding it, that's making sure that the infinite doesn't overwhelm the finite.
Does that do like the beginning of Tzimtzum?
Yeah, after Tzimtzum. After Tzimtzum, this is the situation. Now,
Can something be both infinite and non-infinite at the same time?
all infinity is that way. Infinity carries that paradox all the time.
What paradox I did here?
That it's both infinite and finite at the same time.
Okay.
So when we say that Hashem left the infinite outside, what we mean to say is not that there was only infinite outside. We mean that that state where the infinite and the finite are together was outside, and inside there's just the finite. Okay? And then when he brings the line down, he's bringing a small sliver of the infinite into the finite. And that sliver, that ray of infinite light, as we call it, that is the source of the lines afterwards, or the straights, right? There's no other way to say it, the straight. והעניין שבחינת העיגולים יש בהם גם כן 10 ספירות, אלא שהן בחינת התקללות כוחות הספירות כמו שהן בשורשן טרם התמשכותן בכלים דיושר. So he says, really, there's almost like a reversal here. That when you speak about the igulim, when you speak about the circles, which are, remember, the source, they themselves are the source of what we call a makif. We call it a surrounding light. So what is the situation there? They're in a state of itkalelut. Everything is included in everything. Remember, that's how we describe the soul before it comes into the body. The soul, before it comes into the body, has all the faculties, but they don't exist the way they exist inside the body, where they're differentiated from one another. They're all inter-included. They're all in one thing. And we have to say that they're in a different state. It's like a completely different state because none of them extinguish one another, and all the examples that he brought us.
Potential energy?
It's like a potential, yeah. I said the closest thing in modern in the modern world is probably the electricity in the outlet, which is a potential of energy, and then you use it in different ways. You put a vacuum cleaner in, you put a computer, you put whatever you put into it. Yeah, right. We talked about this many times. I don't know of a better modern example of this. So before the line comes in, they are in a state of, as it were, complete potential, you could call it. And so one could even ask, so why they're concentric circles? Where did that come from? Okay, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and this is discussed in length in Tafrei Samech Vav. The Rebbe Rashab, he talks about this more and more. There's all kinds of questions that start coming up once you understand this model. Why is it this way, not that way? It doesn't really matter, because in the end, what he wants to get from Igulim and Yosher is that the Makif and the Pnimi, that's what he wants to understand. That the source of everything that we call a Makif, that we call a surrounding light, is in the Igulim, is in the circles, and their source is in the great circle. And the source of everything that we call a Pnimi, an integrated light, an inner light, is from the Kav, is from the Yosher. And from the Yosher. And the Yosher comes from the Kav. And the Kav itself, so that we can continue to think what that is. And in the Kav, it's different. How is it different? In the Kav, each one has its own specific place. They're differentiated. That's why the Kav becomes the origin of the three separate axes. The three separate axes is a further distinction between the Sfirot, between the different powers. You're now saying that they're distinguished according to where they are, the left, right, or the middle. והעניין שבחינת הגאולים יש בהם גם כן 10 ספירות, אלא שבחינת התקלות כוחות הספירות, כמו שהם בשורשן טרם התמשכותם בכלים די יושר, להיות כל אחד ואחד במדור בפני עצמו. So in the Kav, again, in the Yosher, they are already in a state of being differentiated, each one in its own dwelling place, its own chamber, as it were. אלא כמו שהם כלולים יחד עדיין. So, but in the עיגולים, they're still all together. ולכן הם כגלדי בצלים זה תחת זה, כי נכללים כאחד. So therefore they are like the, the peels of the onion, the layers of the onion, one above the other. Now the idea of an onion, first of all, gives you the idea that it's three-dimensional. That's a very important clarification. It's not two-dimensional. When you first read it in the Eitz Chaim, you might think, that it should be two-dimensional. But then there's clarifications like the layers of an onion. How does this even help? Layers of onion are still layers; they're still separate from one another. So really, you can't think of. Okay, so they're joined. There's still one onion in the end. So the way that in Chassidus this is explained usually is you have to think about this not as onion and not as something solid, but you have to think about it as gas.
Gas?
Yeah. You have to think about it as concentric. Yeah, I guess. But three-dimensional. He said Saturn's rings. Saturn's rings are not gaseous. They are solid. They're particles. But when you look at it, it looks like one melds into the other. You can't really see that they're separate.
Is it gas particles?
No, it's not gas particles.
Gas are not particles?
No, they are, but,
Yeah.
but Saturn's rings are not gas.
Okay.
They're actually solid.
Okay.
A piece of ice. But imagine that you would have a glass container and you would pump into it gas in different colors. Imagine they would be in different colors. And so then you would very quickly see that they all mesh together. They all mix together. There's no separation between them. So the idea here is that somehow they have no color. They all look the same, but they are in some way distinct from one another. It's a sort of the. Yeah, it's very hard to. But usually when in Chassidus they try to explain it as in gas. But again, the only real example in the end is the soul before it comes down into the body. That's really the only good example that we have, or type of mashal, a metaphor for this. כי נכללים כאחד כנ"ל במשל מכוחות הנפש, כמו שהם כלולים בנפש, הם נעלים מכמו שהם אחר כך בכלים שלהם. וזהו בחינת משכיל מקור החוכמה דאצילות. And that is what we call maskil. Maskil literally means the power of intellect. Koach hamaskil. The power of intellect is the source of everything that afterwards comes down into the soul. It's just called power of intellect. Now it's not intellect because it's more than that, but that's how we call it. There's no better translation. I don't know how to say it better.
Intellect is not chokhmah.
It is. That's exactly what he's saying. Makor ha-chokhmah da-atzilut, the source of the wisdom of Atzilus. And we know that the wisdom of Atzilus, we've talked about this many times, is where the infinite first appears. It has to be first wisdom. So, what do we make with this? How do we explain it? Let's leave it, because again, he doesn't want to really get into this here. אבל בחינת היושר, but the straight, the line, הוא בחינת האורות המתלבשים בכלים. It is the source of the light that is integrated, that is enclosed within the vessels. שאז הם אור בכלי מיוחד, בתלת מוחין מלובש חב"ד כנ"ל, and so on. And we talked a lot about this when we learned the mitzvah of tefillah. And we said that all the names of Hashem are that way. That really the names of Hashem are like vessels relative to Hashem himself. But we said it's like the famous mashal in Chassidus. In Yosher, it's very in the straight, in the lines, it's very easy to explain it. You have a glass of water, and you can either tint the water, you can tint the glass, or you can tint both. And there's all these games with that. וכן חסד וגבורה דרועה ימינה ושמאלה תפארת גופה נצבות חיים שוקין, as it says in the beginning of Patach Liyahu, the beginning of the Tikkunei Zohar, that each one has its own chamber, and in the body it's like in the spiritual body, in the physical body. So chesed goes into the right arm, and the gvura goes into the left arm, and the feet become the dwelling place of netzach and hod, and so on. And so because they have separate dwelling places, they have separate chambers, they are distinct from one another. ואז החוכמה מובדלת מהבינה. זה מקור החסדים וזה מקור גבורות. זה עומד לפעול פעולה זו וזה פעולה אחרת וכנ"ל. וכן מתחלקים עוד ש10 ספירות יש בהם 30 כלים. 10 פנימיים מתלבשים בבריאה ו10 תיכונים ביצירה ו10 חיצוניים בעשייה. לפעול השפעת גשמיים. So another thing that he adds here, we didn't hear this before yet in this book, that each one of the sfirot in the end, in the world of Atzilut, divides into 30 vessels. What do you mean 30 vessels? that the vessel in the world of, or the sphera, sorry, not the vessel, the sphera in the world of Atzilut, in the world of emanation, the highest of the four worlds, when it comes down to populate the three lower worlds, it divides into 30 parts. And they are called the inner aspect of the sphera, the middle aspect of the sphera, and the bottom aspect of the sphera, the exterior aspect of the sphera. And these then correspond to the worlds that we call creation, formation, and action. 10 in each world. But then you'll hear many times that you talk about in Kabbalah that there's the inner aspect of the sphera, there's the middle aspect. What would it be like if you have a vessel? So this is the exterior, it has 10 sphirot. This is the interior, it has 10 sphirot. And then the material itself, from which the between the inside and the outside, that's the middle, right? The medium. Where do we have this? In the Aron Kodesh. And the Ark of the Covenant was made that way. That there was an inner ark, a layer, or actually an ark that was made out of gold. There was then a middle layer that was made out of wood, and then a final external layer that was also made out of gold. So you have 3 layers, making them distinct. This is probably the source. And when you think about it, this has to be the source, because what is the ark? The ark is where everything is square.
Yes.
It's like lines, and it doesn't take up space. Is another thing about it. But the idea is, and the tablets inside are also square. Everything is yosher there. Everything is straight lines, straight edges. It's completely the opposite of nature, right? When you think about the ark is meant to represent the human aspect of the connection to God. When you think about what's above the ark, what's covering it, this whole thing of cherubim, and they have their wings are touching, that's meant to represent nature. That's meant to be round. That's meant to be, and you know, that King Solomon made 2 big cherubim also that he put in the Holy of Holies. That's right. And they were entirely round. Everything about them was round. And especially that they used to swivel on an axis around like that. So I don't know if they actually made an axis or they swiveled by themselves. I don't know what the story is, but that's how the Gemara describes it in Menachos. Okay, so we'll end here. And we made good ground.
Talk about the neshama,
right?
Now, that neshama eventually is going to go into a guf. So is that a partnership which is, when the neshama is made, it's already decided which guf it's going to go into? Or it's just, here's a neshama, there's a guf, put them together?
It's a great question. On the face of it, it has to be decided beforehand. And so the neshama has already foreknowledge of what it's going to be able.
All this potential energy of the neshama, in fact, you know what it is if you know what the guf is going to be.
Right. So then you get into this leads, I believe, it leads into the whole theory of reincarnations in the Arizal. That each neshama needs a certain number of reincarnations to fully express all its powers. But then there's still this aspect of free will, that maybe it'll take longer or take shorter. Like maybe some of these bodies won't be needed. Maybe these stages won't be needed because through the free will.
You can create something which is not needed.
No. I'm saying that that in potential it's there if you need it, but the person.
You mean not needing to come down?
Right. Yeah. It already expressed everything it did.
What it needed to.
And this isn't.
You mean it made its tikkun, so to speak?
Right. Yeah. And the tikkun literally means, we've said this, enclothement. Not fixing, enclothement. It means it's already been expressed, because we said that when the neshama is in a state where it doesn't have a body, it can't express itself. The moment it has a body, it can express itself. Then so to say tikkun means enclothement. It means that everything has been enclothed, everything has been expressed, everything this neshama was supposed to do in the world has already been done.
In Hirschian terms, what is the root? What are we looking at?
What, tikkun? Tikkun is a word from Aramaic.
Is it?
It's not from Hebrew.
It came into our lexicon later.
No, it's from in time of the Bible. No, tikkun means to wear. Nitakan.
When, Moshe?
Not biblical. You know, we say that Aramaic was pretty much around just about the same time that the Torah was given. About this. I don't know if historically this can be corroborated.
Okay, but it's old. It's
definitely from around the 10th century.
Okay.
The Torah was given around the 13th century in BC.
Yeah.
So how close
Okay,
are they? I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
But right away, some of these words made their way in because these were the international languages. Everybody spoke them.
Yeah, I understand.